Hi, I'm Angelique Edmonds, and this is my conference presentation for Repurposing Places for Social and Environmental Resilience. I'm from the University of South Australia, and this is to go in the educational briefs stream. And I'm going to be speaking to you about an advanced architectural design studio environment, which has taken place in South Australia and in the capital city of South Australia called Adelaide. And I'm from the University of South Australia. So in Australia, our part 2 is called a Masters of Architecture. So the design studios I'll be talking to you about are really the equivalent of a diploma or part 2 studio. And I've been running this particular group for 3 years, 2021, 22, and now we've just launched again for 2023. And the thematics continue to evolve, but stay in the sort of locus of being about regeneration and resilience. So the studio is framed by an advocation that architecture delivers the greatest social resonance at the scale of the everyday, and that the greatest environmental performance happens when it works in symbiosis with the natural world. So these themes of environmental and social performance are brought together within a regenerative design approach on an urban site. And the approach is informed by a systems focus, which encourages distributed power sharing and is deliberately trying to engage the agency of local community. And this approach is seeking to enable and support the ability of a community to respond creatively to change or shock and to mitigate against adverse effects. Given this presentation is in the stream for educational briefs, I felt that I would not go into enormous amounts of detail about the literature around resilience that I'm using to frame the studio's aims. But for anyone who is interested in kind of which element or which literature strands I'm using, it's largely informed by Brian Walker's work, and his most recent book is on the left, Finding Resilience, Change and Uncertainty in Nature and Society. Some earlier work from Walker himself and Salt. Another book from 2017 by Daniel Lurch as the editor, and a series of contributions about a community resilience reader. So that's actually sort of looking more at the social lens. There's an interesting piece from Elizabeth Dessy that I've referred to as well, that is specifically about cities and resilience, and then also the work of Lawrence Vale and Thomas Campanella about the resilient city. So at least that helps to give you a sense of my framing. Adelaide is a city of 1 million inhabitants, and we have chosen a site that is in the kind of inner suburbs. So it's probably only about 5 to 10 minute drive from the city. You can see from this aerial Google Maps aerial view what the density is like in this area. There's this beautiful green space called Lind Reserve, which so it's both a residential area and some fringes of industrial urban use. And this beautiful green space had about $10 million invested about 10 years ago to really upgrade and create a kind of high watermark for this area. It has a beautiful naturally occurring creek running through the middle of 2 parklands either side. And a lot of the work that was done was about actually drawing out slowing the water down. So it reduced the erosion, taking some of that water out and going through a filtration system, which then goes into a deeper aquifer. And that aquifer then becomes the repository of water that is drawn upon to water all the plants in this broader council area that's probably about, 10 kilometres squared. And so it's put to the students that there's a number of sites on the perimeter of this reserve that are owned by the council, so assets the council have that are underutilised. And their brief is around really how they can find civic purposes for upgrading and engaging in design speculation for those sites, and to really be thinking about the high watermark of the design vision for the green space that they are adjacent to. So it's also kind of in an interdisciplinary sense, reversing the idea that the architect's work comes first and the landscape architect second, and sort of turns this on its head. And we have the landscape architect coming first 10 years ago. And we get the person who was responsible as the project lead for that to come in every year and give students a briefing on what the main aims and visions were for the project. So in 2021 and 22, 2 sites in the bottom left of your screen were chosen, and in 2023 at the top right, All of them are about delivering a collaborative community centre, which offers a cluster of spaces for communal gathering and social benefit, but also offering all ages learning about sustaining the environment and celebrating the natural systems we live within. The facility, therefore, is having both social connection, but also embodied learning about our connections with nature and our connections to one another, and is intended to offer a program to a range of ages through things like commercial kitchen, movement studios, specialty libraries, and workshops for learning and skill sharing. So these 3 dotted boxes in different colours are intended to show you just briefly the 3 sites that have been used. In 2021, the brief was called Gathering Place, and because it was what's existing in that spot right now is a currently operational childcare centre that is frequented and highly used. So should we speculate on that site, we needed to replace the childcare brief. So that was a very large part of the brief. And in addition, the students could also come up with spaces for connecting and collaborative learning. So this is where the beginning of the commercial kitchen, specialty libraries like tool libraries or libraries of things, 3 different teaching spaces they could add in program for. They could choose what types of program, and then service spaces. In 2022, we then moved to a site immediately adjacent to the one from the previous year. And this is actually the site of a community garden. And for the brief opened up further to include a multi-purpose space, a wet laboratory, 2 specialty libraries this time, a body movement space, and also invited the students to think about that they were designing not just the hard infrastructure, but also the design of a system of soft infrastructure to engage the community and facilitate the establishment of the sort of social inclusion and bonds that would support social resilience. In 2023, our academic year in the Southern Hemisphere starts in March, so we've just begun the studio for the 3rd iteration, and we're working to the east of the site, as you can see, and it's sort of evolved further, and we now also have an opportunity for students to have a speculative additional program that has to sit within certain performance brief parameters. These are the 7 performance brief parameters, and I'll just draw your attention to the fact that applying forethought to generate social and environmental resilience is now one of the key parts. I'd like to share with you some of the work from 2022. So just to briefly explain that we have relied a lot on using the precedents of the participatory city work from London, also the Ezio Manzini. So this is some of the examples from Participatory City about different types of social program that will engage people. And this is the Ezio Manzini collaborative services model. We encourage students to think about the different users within the community and how they can offer services to one another, and how the social fabric of the community work together to reduce the sort of commercial transactional nature of relations and to reinvigorate relations from a different perspective of looking out for one another. So we asked the students to really think about what will their vision be and what will their additional program be. What do they want their design to make possible for the people who they consider will be users, and what connection will they have opportunity to forge with each other and with the environment as a consequence of becoming involved. So just quickly, in the time I have left, some sample student outcomes. This is one from 2022. You can see the student came up with 7 different characters, different ages, different kind of likes and wants. And this was obviously from their research about the demographic of the area and which particular groups were well represented. And you can see on the right-hand side the different programs of compost lab, gardening, central play areas, art exhibition, active classes, cooking studios. That led him to then think about, well, what is the public space between these internalised program, and how can that public space be a sort of for serendipitous outdoor encounter where those groups can come together. So there's a sundial that turns into an open air theatre, and then the ramps of which become, for exploring of water, balls, gravel and slurry, a way for children to become involved in learning about a number of things around force and motion and natural materials. And that also was underpinned by the internal program, which was around these opportunities of serendipitous encounters that have programmatic overlap. So the scraps of food from the commercial kitchen become the fodder for the compost lab. the compost lab material goes into the soil library, and then the journey of the soil from the soil library becomes the fodder for the pottery studio. So there was this virtuous cycle. And as you see here, he's also mapped out the different characters who he envisaged would be engaged in any of these stages. A second piece from a different studio who was particularly interested in bicycles and repair workshops, then went on to add to the brief and sort of do a land swap along the edges of this Lind Reserve. So he kind of speculated that the council, who were very aware of the work we're doing and are interested in the ideas we're coming up with as a series of student speculations, he definitely pushed the brief out even further. And the last one I wanted to show you is a third student, Jacob Nunes-Vaz, who came up with, he was very interested in Australia. We have a colloquial term for toilet, which is dunny, and fair dinkum means true. So Dinkum Dunnies is this book that he found, which is, you know, true toilets. He found this in a secondhand shop and was really inspired to think about the extent to which the community garden people had mentioned there's no toilets on site. It's one of their biggest issues, and that they don't have any money to fund the building of the site. So he came up with this idea that the fecal matter from toilets he would build could be collected, and the digestate from that could be turned into a kind of product that would create bricks from which the community would further be built. So if you look at this of his final scheme, on the left-hand side site plan, you can see in the top left-hand corner, there's sort of like a red M. So he decided that the young people needed a skate park to be re-engaged, because a lot of the youth were not particularly engaged in the community. There's no opportunities for them to come together that aren't requiring commercial participation. So he came up with that, and immediately adjacent to that is a series of public toilets which are not on offer at this end of the site. And then what would happen is, so again, we're in the top left corner, the material that is collected, so that was stage one, would be do the skate park and do the public toilets. And over a period of time, the digestate that could be collected there, produced really from the biodigester, would then make bricks that could be supplemented by commercial bricks to actually do the build. And he also, so the build of the community collaborative centre would be the stage two. And he also had this idea about this, what he called shit a brick travelling toilet, where the travelling toilet would go to festivals and events where it can educate people about the environmental benefits of recycling and fecal waste, and that people waiting in line could play Jenga made from bricks with biodigester digestate. So the element of engaging different community members to develop more social resilience through the process of developing a social fabric that's more closely knit, linked with the environmental performance of these speculations and how they related to the high watermark of the water retention and filtration system, is what I have tried to convey to you in the brief 10 minutes. So this is his final scheme. It's very hard to explain more than that in 10 minutes. So if anyone wanted to follow me up for more detail about the studio or the student work, I'd be more than happy to hear from someone. My email address is there. And thank you very much for your attention.